Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Lucid, and we are going to be doing the national overview for Ermor. Now, many of you may not remember, but Ermor was the very first nation I did a video about way back in the days of Dominions 4. It was about 4 years ago, so that was how my channel started. And Ermor has changed a lot, as has my channel, in the past 3 years. Well, not that much. Ermor's probably changed more than my channel has, but somebody was saying I should probably give it another go. So we are going to try to give them another go. In Dominions 4, they could make a pretty good running for the most powerful nation. They were really strong. In Dominions 5, they have been nerfed extremely heavily. The ways they have been nerfed are severalfold. One is major, like, Hell Blesses are less scary in Dominions, and when I say Hell Blesses, I mean extreme Hell Blesses, are less scary in Dominions 4, Dominions 5 than they are in Dominions 4. And the reason for that is because if you're going to take a major bless, like regen or whatever, you have to go, or you often want to go awake, because the bless is incarnate, so it's only going to be available when your god's awake. So with Ermor, what you would do in Dominions 4 is you would go imprisoned and take a nasty Hell Bless, and you could have 4, like a quad bless even, which was ridiculous. It was truly ridiculous. In Dominions 5, you can't do that. You could go imprisoned and get a pretty scary bless, like a rainbow bless maybe. But a lot of the things that are really good, like the really good blesses, if you're going to go true Hell Bless, a lot of those things are incarnate. So you really kind of don't want to go imprisoned. So it's a bit of a conundrum. The other way they've been nerfed is they started off with neutral scales, but now they start off with Death 3. So anyway, that kind of zaps them. So anyway, they've been nerfed pretty hard. And also just the super strong blesses aren't as good. Like, some of them kind of are better. Like quickness is a little bit better, which Ermor loves. But it's been made more expensive because now it's tin water and you have to get a point in magic, which Ermor doesn't really love in my opinion. Anyway, we'll talk about pretender designs and stuff later. But whereas it was once an extremely strong nation, it's now a bit of a tricky duck. And we'll talk about why that is. But the TLDR of this whole nation is you get a bunch of free spawn from forts. Your free spawn is either your crappy generic long dead, which is low MR but hits sort like medium hard. The Ermorian troops, like the Ermorian long dead, which is shitty MR, better armor this time, and hits about the same, medium. And then you get some sacred free spawn, these Knights of the Unholy Sepulchre. We're going to talk about all these, but you get Knight free spawn from your forts if you have temples, and you have certain units you have basically ways of reanimating sacred undead too, the lictors. And you can get them either with mages and spend death gems, or you can get them more slowly with priests, but they don't cost any death gems, except the death gems for the priest. So, yeah, that is Ermor. It is a nation of free spawn with sacreds. The problem, though, is they have god-awful research. Unlike Lemuria, they don't get mages and forts with temples and labs. They have no income. They actually kill population, I think, even faster than Lemuria, but if not, then just as fast. So everything dies. And it's very, very hard to have good income unless you're very, very aggressive in winning your wars. And you can't recruit mages, so you're limited to hopefully finding some good indie mages that can research for you, or spending your ever so precious death gems on mages to research, which you can do, but you also kind of need to survive. So those are conflicting priorities. Do I want to research or do I want to live? If we boil Ermor down, you were a nation which does a few things, undead free spawn and sacred undead, very well. It's very good at those. But making that type of strategy work normally involves heavy buffing, like magic access and these sorts of things. And these are things which Ermor is horrible at. It is the worst research nation in the game. Now, you could argue and be like, well, we're going to put all our death gems into research and we'll actually have okay research. Yeah, but then you'll die because you don't have any of the other stuff you should have put death gems into. So they're the worst research nation in the game. They have some of the worst magic access in the game. Their best mage, they can't bring into combat because he'll get magic dueled the second he sticks his head out versus most nations. So you're in a very real conundrum as Ermor. You have one small set of tools, and there are a multitude of threats which can kill you. And you have to figure out, with this one set of tools, how could I potentially trick everybody into letting me win the game? And I don't really know how to do that. So if you're watching this guide and you're thinking, I'm going to tell you, I'm not, but I'm going to give you my best ideas. Now, the game we're going to be playing Ermor in is, it's called Radiation Therapy, and we have pre-assigned all the most cancerous nations into the game. So we've got MA Relay, we've got Ashdod, we've got Nazca, we've got Scalaria, we've got Nabah. We've got whatever people thought were the most cancerous. Those just got pre-assigned, and then people had to sign up for them. And then people picked whatever. Once we were kind of out of the ones we were sure were cancerous, people just felt they picked the other ones they thought were strongest. So anyway, we're having all the cancer in this game from middle age. So it's not going to be an easy game. I don't think I can win it. I think the hill's too steep. But we'll see. I tend to do pretty well with popkill nations, but I don't really see how I'm going to do it. And the problem let's refine this again. What is the main problem of the nation? Like I said, you are a hammer and everything looks like a nail, but sometimes it's not a fucking nail. It's a hammer eater, and you're going to stick your hammer into the hammer eater, and you're going to get wrecked. So what are the things that we have to worry about? We have to worry about battlefield wipes. We have to worry about super combatants. We have to worry about the enemy putting up fog warriors and not giving a shit about our 1,000 skeletons. There's a lot of things we have to worry about. We have to worry about banishment communions. There's so many things we have to worry about. And I don't know how we're going to deal with them all because we have such a small toolkit. Anyway, let's talk about the nation now. So it's a free spawn nation, obviously. We're going to first talk about the types of free spawn you get. This right here... Oh, whoops, I've kind of hosed it up a bit. What is on these top two guys right here... Let me get this out of sight. What is on these two commanders is 10 turns of free spawn out of a fort with a temple. Okay? You also get some free spawn of garbage, like right over here, if you have no fort or no temple. Okay, you get skeletons and soulless. It's garbage. But better than nothing. If you have a fort and a temple, you get... Okay, so if you don't have a fort... if you don't have a temple, but you have a fort, I think you're going to get most of this other stuff, but you're not going to get the Sacred Knights. And these are really good. We'll talk about them first. But I'm going to go through the categories real quick. We've got Cavalry. We've got your generic run-of-the-mill Long Dead. We've got Soulless. We have the Ermorian Javelin Legionnaires. We've got the Ermorian Triarius, or non-Javelin dudes. And we've got Ghouls. All right, these are the free spawn we get. The Knight is... There's a few things I'm going to point out there that's important. One is it's 14 MR, which is higher than a lot of your other troops. 16 defense, which is very high. 17 protection, which is very high. 3 attacks, including a heavy lance charge. And then the broadsword, which will scale with strength, and the hoof that doesn't. And again, they're sacred. They have pierce resistance, which is nice. And they have a kite shield. Almost all the Ermorian troops are going to have good shields. They take a bless well. They take Killy blesses especially well. So anyway, that is the Knight. Next up, we have the Long Dead Horseman. Very similar to the Sacred Dude, except worse in almost every way. Worse magic resistance, worse protection, worse defense. Light Lance, so it has a worse charge. And then it has a hoof, which is also not super great. Has a shield, which is still okay, but not as good. And then it has some armor. What it's superior in is it's a little faster on the map. And this is also pretty fast, but not quite as fast. And it's a little faster in combat, 25 compared to 23. These are excellent flankers. And then these obviously can be really good with the Bless. Next up, we have the normal Long Dead. We're not going to talk about them. The only thing that I will mention is that your guys without armor are actually cavalry speed almost. On the map, they're cavalry speed 20. So a lot of times they can go places that 18 dudes can't. And then in combat, 11 is pretty fast. Like, it's significantly faster than these guys who are like 8 or 9, depending on their armor. So you can use these guys as mini flankers in combat too. Next up, we have the Soulless. The Soulless are festering piles of hot garbage. They have 15 hit points, which seems nice until you realize they have 0 protection and 3 defense. They literally will melt to almost any kind of assault against them. Banishment chews them up because they have 5 base magic resistance. You can see it's 6 with the drain scale. But yeah, basically if they get hit by anything, they die immediately. You may say, Lucid, whatever could their purpose be? Well, they have 2 purposes. One is they're bad at patrolling, but they're less bad at patrolling than they're bad at everything else. And the other thing is that they have, well, this guy's weakened. They tend to have pretty good strength. So they're actually better than average at sieging. So they're good at sieging. They're bad, but less bad at patrolling than other things. And that is the Soulless for you. Hot pile of steaming garbage. Next up, we have the Ermorian Javelin troops. If we look at the Ermorian Javelin troops, what is important is they all have a javelin. And this javelin, it has 2 ammo. Its range is its strength. So you can throw it about 11 tiles. And it's pretty good. Even these shitty guys, there's a few flavors of them. Let's spread them out into all the different flavors. The worst kind are these guys. They're also the most plentiful. And yeah, they're naked they have a hat, but they have no body armor. They have okay defense, so they'll dodge sometimes. And if they block things with their shield, a lot of times they can survive. But if they don't block with their shield, they're basically guaranteed to be dead. So that is the Velite. But they have a javelin. So even though they're kind of crap in other ways, they have a javelin. They can throw it. When they close into melee, pretty good chance they die. But, they've got a spear. They can poke things. They have pierce resistance. Could be worse. Useful. Better than a lot of your other undead. The shield is going to help protect them from archer fire. Next up, we have these guys who are notable for having slightly better armor. 10 protection instead of 3. That's because they have a ringmail hauberk. They also have a big, nice tower shield with really high parry value, which means it's going to be very good at blocking arrows. And they have a javelin and a spear, so not bad at all. I think they have 1 more damage too than same damage. Yeah, but anyway, very solid troop. These guys are much more durable in melee combat than you would think against things like indies. Against player troops, they kind of melt a little bit, kind of like the normal undead do. But the javelin's nice. A lot of different things will kind of not like getting hit by javelins. Really elite player troops are not going to care about javelins, but a lot of player troops care about 13 piercing damage. And then finally, we have the Long Dead Princeps, and these guys are more exceptional for having slightly better protection, and I believe they have slightly better defense. Yeah, these guys are 13 defense. These guys have 1 more hit point and 1 more defense, and then better protection. They're pretty durable. They also have a slightly higher damage weapon. It's a short sword, which will sometimes be piercing and sometimes be slash. So I don't know. It's sort of better because sometimes you'll get the piercing, which is kind of the better damage type, and then it's better than 14 piercing. But the times when you're getting slash, it's probably about the same. So a little bit higher damage, I would say. And then finally we have the Triarius, and these guys have a long spear, so it means you're going to be getting repel checks, which is quite nice. They have really high armor, 16. Same 6 HP. Their defense is not great. It's not great at all. But combined with the repel, these guys actually tend to be the most durable kind of long dead you have. And the protection. So put them up there in the front line. Let them poke at things with their long spears. Everything will be great. The final kind of unit that we have for free spawn is the ghoul. The humble ghoul. Now, the ghoul is notable for 0 protection and for not being mindless. So they tend to die in combat very quickly. You want to keep them out of combat, like melee combat. Range. You don't want them in combat. They can show up in fights, but you don't want them fighting. They are one of your few troops that is not mindless, and why that's important is because one of the strats to counter Ermor is you snipe all of the mindless or the non-mindless things in combat, which typically includes all of the commanders, and if you are successful in doing that, then all the mindless stuff will dissolve, which can be a problem if you're playing Ermor. So one solution is you bring a bunch of ghouls, and when they're doing things like Soul Slay, Mind Blast, Mind Burn, all those things that target units that have minds, they will also target your ghouls, and therefore they won't kill your commanders, and therefore your armies may not dissolve. That's use number 1 for ghouls. Use number 2 for ghouls is because they are not mindless, they actually have decent siege defense, and this means they can hold up fort walls. So that is the other major purpose for ghouls. These guys have a siege defense of 6.6, so that means 100 of these guys would have a siege defense of 60, whereas like your normal undead, they're going to have a siege defense of 0.01. And I think it actually may be lower than that. That means 100 of these guys, at best, assuming this isn't rounding up, would have a siege defense of 10. So ghouls are way, way better at that. And they're not very good at combat. So anyway, ghouls definitely have a role. And in my opinion, the role is holding up fort walls and then absorbing things that would kill your commanders. So these are the free spawn. Next up, we have the commanders. Now, let's talk about those. So we have a few kinds. You get, well, let's take a look at these first. So free spawn commanders. We get Mound Kings, which are like the Mound Kings you get from the spell. We have these guys who don't have a mount. They're a little slower. They're 20. Otherwise, kind of okay stats. We have these guys who are the more familiar looking Mound Kings who are a little bit faster. You can see 24. A little higher defense, and they have a hoof and all this business, but their main job is to ferry troops around. And then we have the Censor, which is like a lictor but a commander, so it's sacred, which is nice if you have a good bless. Has 5 base natural protection, is wearing some kind of crappy armor, but this guy kind of can thug inside of an army. He'll get melted by things that tend to melt undead, but what are you going to do? But potentially with the weapon and stuff, he can kill super combatants or thugs or whatever if you have the right weapon on him. The problem is, again, like, you have to imagine Witherbones getting dropped all over the place and lictors getting burnt alive by the thousands or hundreds. And this guy would die just the same way everything else does. But anyway, also competent undead leader, importantly, does not have great leadership, which only actually oddly matters for leading lictors. If you're leading lictors, you actually don't want lictors on your censors. You want your lictors on your Mound Kings, because your Mound Kings have better normal leadership, which will affect the morale of lictors. Speaking of lictors, let's take a look at them. These are lictors. They're very similar to censors. They have 20 HP, which is pretty high. They're size 2, so you fit 3 per square. 16 protection, but no hat, so weak head protection. Not great attack or defense, but they have a big friggin' battle axe, right? So they chop the shit out of stuff with their battle axe. Pretty good. Protection is okay. They have a chill aura, which is nice. Yeah, they're a solid troop. And a lot of your bless is going to be designed around getting them. Now, how do you get them, you may ask? Lictors you get by, well, any of your holy... Let's talk about reanimation real quick. So these are all the things you can reanimate. Your H1, so if you get an indie priest, they actually can reanimate. I'll just show you like the icon. So you can see even indie priests are reanimators for Ermor. So if you get an indie priest, you can get ghouls, soulless, and long dead warriors. If you have a holy 2 priest like your bishop, you can get the long dead horsemen. And if you have a holy 3, you can get lictors. So Obviously, getting lictors is pretty good. You want as many lictors as you can have. And this is nice because once you pay the initial investment of the priest, this is basically free thereafter. Or more precisely, it costs the use of that priest turn, which has value. Because sometimes you're going to want your priests off doing other things. So anyway, that is the lictor. This is a two-handed weapon too, so they benefit a lot from strength buffs if you can figure out how to get it on there, or potentially if you take a strength bless, they can hit really, really hard. Contrarily and non-synergistically, the knights don't benefit as much from a strength bless. The lance is actually nice on because it's going to give them a better charge, but the sword, it's like I guess it's good. The hoof doesn't benefit, so anyway, it's okay. Strength blesses are okay. So, we have talked about the lictors now. Now let's talk about the mages and summons we get. There's a few we can get. We can get the Acolyte, the Bishop, the Archbishop, the Spectator, and the Dusk Elder. And we're going to look at all those real quick. Okay, here they are. So this is the Acolyte. Holy One, it's going to be useful for leading, especially early in the game if you're using Knights for expansion, for leading Knights around. Not terribly exceptional. Has 5 base natural protection. Otherwise, not too much to write home about here. Can reanimate. What do you want me to say? It does have enough, just with the base protection and the hit points, it has enough where it can normally survive a hit or two in combat. If something gets back there, they're not going to instantly kill it. If it gets hit by an arrow, it's going to be okay. But it's not going to be great. You don't want this guy in combat, but you'll find it's a lot better leading parties than like an indie priest. Next up, we have the Bishop. The Bishop, the Holy 2 variety, basically the same deal. Not much has changed. Slightly better HP, slightly better MR, slightly better attack and defense. Holy 2 means it can bless better and reanimate undead. Next up, we have the Holy 3, the Archbishop. Now, these guys are important because, well, for a few reasons. One is they can reanimate lictors. So you can have these guys just sitting around pumping out lictors all day. Second, they can cast Unholy Blessing Battlefield-wide Edition, which means they can bless your huge swaths of sacred troops, which you're going to want to do. Third, if you get these guys to Holy 4 by becoming a prophet, they can do Power of the Sepulchre, which is going to make all of your guys basically have +4 attack, which is really nice. It's otherwise kind of tricky to do that, by the way, to do Power of the Sepulchre. But anyway, that's the Archbishop. They can also do Big Area Effect. Just at level 3, they can do Unholy Power on kind of big areas. But, yeah. Anyway, that's the Archbishop. Super important. Then we have the Spectator. These guys are an interesting duck because, on one hand, they kind of seem like they could thug. They're ethereal. They're stealthy. They have fear. These are all really good tags for a thug. Like, even good tags for a super combatant. They have Chillar, which is also kind of nice for thugging. They have Death 2, which, not great in thugging. You can basically do like skeletal body, but with a death gem or 2, you could do soul vortex or invulnerability. So in a pinch, these guys can thug well if you're willing to spend death gems, and probably put some gear on them. The problem is they die to undead stuff, so you probably, like, you have to imagine they're going to be fielding stuff to kill huge swaths of undead. This guy will just get mixed up in them and die. But he'll be okay at killing PD and stuff. But do you want to spend a death gem every single time you send this guy into combat? Probably not. Probably not. So I don't know. Mostly these guys are for researching if you pick magic, which I think is viable. You could go magic. I personally have a preference against magic on Ermor because I think you need more mileage out of your bless. But, for example, if you take the quickness bless, you're forced to have magic, and these guys then become kind of your better researchers. Finally, we have the Dusk Elder, which is a controversial unit in that, on one hand, it's really good. Like, these are all really great paths. It can thug, it can super combatant, it can cast some cool spells. you can do some really cool stuff. Like power the spheres, and then it's can do firepower. It's now all of a sudden the fire 3. Like, that's cool. The base paths for it is it's it's fire, astral, death 3. Then it has a random for fire, water, astral, air, death. Right, and you can see in this case we got the water random. And then there's another 10% random for those again. Most of the time you don't get that. But these guys have a lot of hats to wear. You have to recruit some of them. They're going to be your best way to site search and break into these other paths. The problem, the Achilles heel, is this astral path. It really fucks this mage over. I think after the Ermor nerfs, it could really use a small Ermor buff. Like, the buff I would choose is making it where they don't all have astral. Like, 50% of them have astral, right? Like, take the astral out and give them... Okay, here's what you do. You take the death out of the random that they get, out of the normal random, and then you give them, and then you take the astral out of the base paths, and then you give them a 50% astral death random. Right, so some are going to be death 4, some are going to have astral 1. Anyway, then you'll have some you can use more. The astral ones aren't going to be that useful, but they'll be sort of useful. And you'll have a chance of getting an astral 2. Anyway. I labor the point. But anyway, it is critical. Like, if you're fighting a nation that has any kind of astral mage, you literally cannot bring these guys to fights. But if they're not expecting them, and you're just going to be raiding a random province, they're probably not going to have somebody magic dueling. So you can thug or super combatant kind of with these guys. They have really good magic pass. And if your enemy is not expecting you to do it because you haven't been doing it, you could sneak these guys out in super combatant against an army, because they're pretty good. The problem is, again, if they have things which are set up to kill undead, it's hard to super combatant against that type of thing. Think dust to dust, wither bones, all that sort of thing. Astral communions. It's not going to be pretty. But against mundane troops, this guy can do some nasty stuff once you have research. And he's very good against PD and very good at raiding with stealthy. So, anyway, that is the Dusk Elder. And I mentioned site searching. Finally, the last unit we have to cover is the Wailing Lady. And let's talk about how you get them. You can spend 8 gems and get 1, which is really expensive. Really expensive. Or you can spend 33 gems and get 14. This is like 3 gems per rather than 8. So it's more than half off, and it's way more mage turn efficient. So at this point, once you have this, you can look at it and be like, maybe. Let's look at why we might want to get them. Well, they're sacred, which is nice, because we're probably going to have a nice bless. They have got pretty good defense skill. They're ethereal, which is nice. They're stealthy, which is nice. They have fear 10, which is nice. And then they have this attack whale, which is very nice. It's basically a soul slay attack that has area of effect 1 and attack 10. So it's basically always going to hit. I don't even know what this attack would matter for. But yeah, it's not really going to get repelled. And it's MR negates, though. So basically it's just going to be a soul slay to a whole square forever. And then even if it misses, it's going to apply fear in a 5 area of effect around it, in conjunction with its fear aura. So really good. But you have to imagine, this unit does not exist in isolation. If this were a unit on a nation where I wasn't expecting massive swaths of wither bones, then sure, this unit's good. But once you've played Ermor and you see 10 wither bones getting spammed a turn, you're like, why do I want to pay 8 death gems to have something that's going to die to 1 or 2 wither bones? So that is the conflict. But this is a way to kill super combatants, and it's very hard for this nation to deal with super combatants. So even at 8 death gems per, it may be your only feasible way of killing a super combatant that's going to come mess with your entire army. I'd rather probably put gear on a lictor, to be honest. But I don't know. It depends. I'm on the fence. I want to like this unit, but I'm not sure I do. We're going to cover a few more things. One is on lictors. So I mentioned you can get them through mages or priests. You get them for the amount of death gems you invest. You get them it's a much faster return. Like, for the amount of death gems you're going to put in, you're going to get way more lictors per death gem if you use mages. If you have a short time window. Like, if you're only looking at, like, 15 turns ahead, you're going to get way more lictors using mages. But if you're looking, like, 40 turns ahead, you're going to get way more lictors using priests. So anyway, that's the kind of trade-off you have to make. But you're only going to do lictors with mages if you get the laurel, which is a construction item. So anyway, it's a little bit up to you. But if you're in a fight for your very life, like if you're thinking you may lose forts and like lose your cap, my suggestion would be do the mages. If you're a little bit more relaxed, like you're attacking somebody else, you're not in imminent danger, I'd suggest the priests. That's my guidance on that. So we're mostly done talking about the nation. Let me give you my closing thoughts. And in some ways, it's going to be a repeat of the opening. My closing thoughts are, you're a nation with... Oh, you know what I didn't do? We didn't talk about troop quantities. Closing thoughts in a minute, boys. Time for some Dominion science. So this is the amount of the free spawn that you get from a palisade with a temple over 10 turns. What you see between these two units here. And you can see we got 5 sacreds. This actually is a little low. A lot of times you'll get like 5 to 7, I would say, for a palisade. I've done this a lot of times to test it. About 30 to 40 Ermorian troops, a bunch of shitty long dead, a bunch of soulless, and then a few Triarius. If we come down here to this is your level 2 fort, you were going to get way more of the Ermorian long dead. 83 compared to about 40, so almost twice as many. The total amount of troops we get is about the same. I think there's some zombies or something would have gotten too. But the total amount of troops you get is about the same. And what that means is you're getting less of the shitty long dead and less of the soulless. That's mostly where these numbers come from. You also, I believe, are going to get slightly more of these Sacred Horsemen. The other, if you have a tier 1 Palisades, I think you get about, like, over 10 turns. This is with 7 Dominion. It'd be better if you have more, worse if you have less. Over 10 turns, you're going to be getting about... you'll be getting... So for the tier 1 for it, like the Palisade, you get, like, 5 to 7. For this one, I found you get normally, like, 7 to 8, like 7 to, let's say 6 to 9. So a bit more, but not a ton more. But mostly you're getting way better quality Ermorian kind of Legion troops. And then finally, we have these guys. So this is, or not finally, but almost finally. This is the best fort you can upgrade, a castle. So this is your tier 3 fort. Your tier 3 fort is basically the same. It looks like a little bit better, but I've tested this a lot of times. I did not find this was much better. For the Sacreds, you can see it's the same. We got 7. Doesn't appear to be a huge change. For the Triarius, it's 30, which is a bit better. But I tested this a bunch, and what I have found is the Tier 2 and Tier 3 make non-noticeable differences, whereas the difference between the Tier 1 and Tier 2 is pretty noticeable. You get a lot better undead quality if you go to Tier 2, and you get a few more Sacred. So I think it's worth it going... And the Tier 1 forts are a liability. 100 wall integrity can get popped anytime. 250 requires some kind of commitment at least. But the difference in going from Tier 2 to Tier 3, yeah, you get twice as much siege defense, or like wall strength, but the troop quality is not very big. Now, if you find a way to get a Citadel, which there's a few ways in the game, like you can do 3 red seconds, you can get a Mason, and you can do it. But you don't really have access to Mason, so you'd have to finagle it. But there's a few ways to finagle it. Anyway, if you can manage that, you can get a Citadel. Now, Citadels give you really good troops. Holy shit, look at this. You get... This is, again, 10 turns. No shitty troops, just about. Like, hardly any shitty troops. All of them are quality undead. And then the amount of sacreds you get is just phenomenal. It's ridiculous. It's so many. So it's worth thinking about maybe trying to figure out a way to getting Citadels. But it's hard because you can't really do it. Like, you're not a blood power, you have low research, so kind of rules out 3 red seconds. So really your only option's a Mason, but you don't have access to Masons. Maybe in a Disciples game it's something to think about. Anyway, that is the Citadel. So that's it for the Dominion Science. Now, coming over here to our final thoughts. We need to talk about threat vectors real quick. We're going to have the worst research in the game by a large margin. May or may not be ganged up on, which means you can't usually do things greedy like going imprisoned. And I don't think you would want to go imprisoned, because then you couldn't be aggressive. And I think you kind of need to be aggressive. Now, as long as you're dealing with the problem where a lot of skeletons and some pretty good skeletons are going to fix that problem, you're going to be fine. But what happens, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. What happens when a super combatant comes out that is immune to skeletons? What are you going to do? They're immune to your lictors. They have enough defense that your lictors can't hurt it. What are you going to do? You're going to die. That's what you're going to do. What are you going to do when somebody casts Firestorm or Wrathful Skies with Storm up? What are you going to do then? That's just going to, in 4 or 5 rounds of combat, it's going to clear almost all your undead out. What are you going to do? What are you going to do when somebody's got a Banishment Communion set up where each round of the Banishment Communion costs them almost no fatigue, and it's literally killing with each turn in combat 150 undead, just because there's so much banishment? What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do when you've got all these lictors you spend all these turns making, and somebody comes out and they're like, oh, you have lictors, I have a spell called Wither Bones. And every time they cast it, it deletes, 6 to 10 lictors. What are you going to do about that? These, in some ways, are questions which I will leave to the student, but they are very concerning when you're playing Ermor, because Dominions is a game of hard counters, and if somebody comes up with something which you cannot respond to in kind, there's no trading, you just lose. So, anyway, that's the main thing I think we have to think about when we start doing our Bless. And that will be in the next episode, so I will see you guys then, where we will talk about what to do with the Ermorian hand we are dealt. Take care, guys.